Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're just going to get started here in just a few brief moments. So sit tight while people come in. Feel free to let us know where you're watching from in the chat. Or if you have questions already, feel free to put those in the Q&A box as well. Great. So it looks like we have about 80 folks in so far. Today we're going to be talking about all the policies and processes around COVID relief. So we hope you came with questions. Okay. Hi, Carla from Jackson. Hey, Judy from Diocese of Trenton. That's where my home diocese. Altoona, Johnstown. Great. What town? Oh, I'm from Manchester, Judy. Okay, we already got some questions coming in. So feel free to leave your thoughts and questions in the chat box. Just to note, you can choose if you want to communicate with just the panelists or all attendees as well. And before I pass it off to Sister Dale, just a few housekeeping items for you. Once again, thanks for joining us today. We're glad you're here. So we have Sister Dale McDonald from NCEA, as well as Jennifer Daniels from the USCCB. I'm here to talk about COVID relief, so we're very grateful to them for taking the time to be here with us today. If you have any questions, feel free to submit those in the Q&A. We also invite you to join the conversation in the chat box. And for specific questions that you'd like to see addressed, we encourage you to use the Q&A rather than the chat, so we make sure to catch it. Also, if you're interested in a certificate of attendance for today's webinar, we invite you to complete the post-webinar survey, which we will share at a number of points during and after the webinar, along with the slides. So now I can pass it off to Sister Dale to open us up in prayer. So thanks, Sister.
Thank you. Let us place ourselves in the Lord's presence as we begin. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Good and gracious God, we gather today in your name, grateful for the opportunity to share with one another our vocation as Catholic school educators. During this Catholic Schools Week, as we celebrate Catholic education's commitment to faith, excellence, and service, we ask your blessing on us and on our school communities. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Well, thank you for joining us. As Jonathan said, I am Sister Dale McDonald. I'm the Director of Public Policy for NCEA, and I'm joined by Jennifer Daniels.
Hi, everybody. I'm the Associate Director for Public Policy at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops for the Secretariat of Catholic Education. And I just want to apologize in advance. I'm going to have to step off the call at 2:30 today. So I'm going to be logging off and leaving Sister Dale with the Q&A at the end. So I just want to give everybody a heads up. Thanks.
We may get to some of them before you leave. So our agenda today is to talk about the Corona Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, CRRSA as we refer to it. This is an additional amount of money that has been put into two parts of the original CARES Act. The GEAR Fund, which is the emergency assistance the GEAR Fund 2, which is the money that goes to the governor. And in that bill is the emergency assistance to non-public schools, the EANS part of the bill. And we'll talk if that's what we're going to concentrate on, but just to situate it, ESSER 2 is also in there the way it was in the first one, the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, but that is only for public schools. We do not get equitable services there because our money is in the EANS part of that bill. So we are getting our own separate money, and the public school is getting their money, which certainly is considering, our funding, the 53.6 billion that goes to the public schools is set aside, and we don't have to compete for that. Again, to emphasize that EANS is new funding. Anything that you received or promised under the original CARES Act is still yours to be able to access for goods and services that you want. And they don't count against this EANS money. This is new EANS money. So looking at what that money is for, we see here it's 2.75 billion. That's our money, which, as I said, is this paltry sum compared to the 53.6 that the public schools get. And this is money that the Department of Ed wants to get out the door quickly, get it distributed to our schools, get it distributed in a way in which we can continue the excellent work our principals, our superintendents, our teachers have been doing to keep our schools functioning almost at 100% for all of our students. So the governor is the one who has to ask the Department of Ed for this money. The governor sends in a certification and agreement form. And once the Department of Ed approves that, the governor has the money, and then the governor distributes it to our schools as following the law. The important thing is that this is supposed to move quickly. And Jennifer will talk a little bit about that and distinguish it from the payroll protection program that's also in its second version.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, sister. So as with most government programs, there's always a catch, right? And the catch here is that you have to pick and choose between two options that are in this bigger package of legislation. You may not apply for this money, the EANS money, and also apply for a second round of PPP. Now, the good thing is these, it was put in this way because it appears that we're double dipping and we're getting, something that the public schools aren't getting, we're double dipping. But in reality, these two pots of money are address two completely different issues, and the array of services that they provide are two completely different directions. So you should assess your needs and make the choice accordingly. There's not a right or a wrong answer here, but it is about your school and your students and your teachers and what their needs are. So this chart is just meant to be a very kind of 10,000 foot side-by-side comparison. There's a lot more details that you can go into, but this is just a very basic comparison. First of all, like I said, is the uses of funds. Everything within the EANS program is related to health, safety, and the academic needs of the students in an educational setting, whereas PPP is much more directed towards operations. And y'all, many of you would be familiar that applied for that in the first round. There were a few additional services available to be paid for with the PPP than the last round. They did broaden that a little bit, and they did also broaden the ability to get the grant forgiven. So there's been changes in that as well. The timing is important. PPP is already open, and there's a deadline, March, the end of March. The EANS is going to move slower. We already know that the governors can apply, but there's going to be a much longer process for the EANS. FFA, we're going to talk about this a little bit more later, but the PPP is considered direct recipients of federal funding, whereas the EANS program is not. Like we said, the PPP can be forgiven. The EANS is a grant. But the PPP would have to be reimbursed if you do not meet the requirements that are laid out in the law. For eligibility, this is a very important change from first round PPP. All participants or borrowers must demonstrate a 25% reduction in gross receipts from comparing one quarter from this year to one quarter, from 2020 to 2019. That's a new consideration that will certainly have an impact on ability to participate. And EANS, everyone is eligible to participate, all schools, as long as they do not receive a second round of PPP. And the allocation. This is kind of maybe one of the biggest questions right now, because we don't have a real easy calculation for the per pupil for the EANS. It's based on a variety of characteristics that we will discuss in more detail. And the PP loan is based on the size of your employee, the number of your employees. So being able to compare those side by side is going to take a little bit more individual effort, school by school.
And also these are, the PPP is very specific, has a lot of regulations, has a lot of issues that we don't feel confident in explaining. You need to talk with your attorney and you need to talk with your school financial person when you're considering the PPP, because it's beyond our expertise at this period, at this point.
It's not an education program.
Right, right.
So Sister Dale talked about a little bit about the process, how this is going to work. You know, this program is basically an equitable services program, just like ESSA, just like an IDA that we're familiar with, equitable services. However, the difference is that the governor and the SEA are going to be in charge here. This is all going to be done at the state level, and the LEA does not have to be involved unless the SEA decides to make that the case. But this is to be determined at the state level. So right now, the governors have the ability to apply. Right now, we have been working very, very closely with state leadership across the country, Catholic conferences, our state CAPE friends, to ensure that all governors are hearing from the non-public community and encouraging them to apply. They must decide to apply. This is not an automatic thing, and a governor can choose not to apply. So this is the first hurdle. We have heard good, positive feedback from across the country, even in some of our blue states that we're a little concerned about. But if you, as a school leader, have not heard for sure if your governor is applying or not, I would encourage you to reach out to your state leaders, your state Catholic conference or your state CAPE, and see what's going on and what their process is, because we want to make sure that every single governor hears from the non-public school community. They will make this certification an agreement, and the department is hoping to get the funds to the governors within 15 days, so that once they actually decide, it's a very quick turnaround for the money to be received at the state level. So once the governor's application is approved, the funds will automatically be given to the SEA, the State Education Agency, to administer. That is an automatic thing that the Department of Education is doing without discussion. So there is, several things outlined very, very specifically in the law about what the SEA does as a part of their administering of the program. And much of this is very positive, but they also leave a whole lot of open-ended, requests that they don't detail very much. So a couple things that I want to highlight in terms of what they are required to do that's positive is they are required to distribute this information to all the non-public schools in the state. And this is really important because many non-public schools don't participate in federal programs. They may not be a Title I participating school or other programs, and so they may not. But this is a new pandemic, this is an emergency, and there may be schools that are interested in participating for the first time that may not have in the past. And they are also responsible for doing all of this in a timely fashion. There are set deadlines throughout the entire administrative process, and they're pretty tight. So it is up to the SEA to ensure that all of this timeline is followed very, very quickly. I won't read the whole thing here because a lot of this is about the application itself, and we're going to go into that more. But just to say that they are in charge of the application, they're in charge of the application process and implementing that process. And so we're going to talk a minute more detail about how to make sure we have a seat at the table for those decisions. So you can go on to the next one, Sister.
It's not moving.
Oh, okay. So here's some of the timelines that I just mentioned. And this is all in the law. So this is all very, very specific. This is not recommendations from the Department of Education. You go back to the timeline, Sister. Yeah. So like I mentioned, the application deadline for governors to apply is February 8th. And just to reiterate, if your governor does not submit that certification application, then your state will receive no money. That's the deadline. It'll be over at that point. So we're talking several days from now. After that, the SEA has only 30 days to get that application out the door and get that process starting. One thing that's not in the law is how long do you as the non-public school have to get that application turned in. That is not in the law, but the U.S. Department of Education recommended 30 days. Then in the law, the SEA only has 30 days to approve or deny the application. So they can't just sit on those applications longer than that. Then they have 6 months to get all the funds obligated. Now we're going to talk about what does obligate mean down the road, but generally speaking, get those contracts signed, be ready to have decided what the money will be spent on. However, this is super important. You can still use the funds. The services can be provided all the way through September 23rd. I'm sorry, 2023. So this, going back to the PPP conversation, this is a really important consideration because PPP money is going to come and go very quickly. And it, depending on, again, the needs of your school, this is an opportunity for you to have access to services until 2023. And we'll talk about this in your application, but these are, when you apply, we have to be thinking about this. This is a long-term, well, I would say long-term program compared to other things we've been working on. So we need to be thinking about our application process in terms of 2 to 3 years.
Okay, looking at the funding and then the allocation of schools, we're talking about funding formula. How does the state get its money? The state gets its money in a set formula that's very similar to Title I. The state, they use census data from the Department of Ed, uses census data and bases on the relative number of age 15 to 17-year-old students in public schools who are from families at or below 185% of the poverty level. So that's how the state gets its money. And at the last slide, we do have a link there to the charts from the Department of Ed on what each state might expect as its allocation. So then the state gets the money. The SEA has a great deal of flexibility on how to give out this money. The law simply says that the SEA, the State Education Agency, must prioritize EANS services or assistance to schools that enroll low-income students and to schools that are most impacted by COVID-19. So there's two things there, low income and schools most impacted by COVID-19. The law and the Department of Education Q&As that you should all at least have taken a look at, hopefully by now, does not specify in any detail what low income means or what impacted by COVID-19 means. So the SEA defines for itself what low income means. So it can be 185% of poverty, it can be 300% of poverty. The only criteria is that whatever the state says is the poverty level, that has to be similar for all schools. You can't make different poverty levels for schools across the state. Then the other thing is, how to divide up this money. So we have, one of the suggestions in the FAQs is a per pupil allocation. So you look and you say, we've got, in our state, we have $250 million and we have 10,000 kids in private schools. So you simply divide and you get a per pupil allotment, a PPA. Others are saying, well, maybe we do that, but then we start to modify it that you get a weighted formula based on a poverty level. If your school has 90% kids, you get X. If your school has 30%, you get X. So that that's another way they might be able to go. The other is quantification of the impact factors. How has COVID impacted the school? And that's where you can really be expansive in your thinking about how has COVID impacted my school. Certainly you can point to the number of an actual dollar amount that you've lost in income from tuition, from tuition and fundraisers. That's a loss that impacts the way in which you deliver programs, all right? It's not just, well, we lost X amount of dollars, but how has that impacted the teaching and learning process? Um, You might talk about the fiscal impact of declining number of students and your enrollment decline and the loss of tuition has impacted what you can do. You want to talk about the lack of capacity to provide full-time instruction in the classrooms due to social distancing, and that you could bring back all the kids full-time if you rented additional space, you rented trailers to, park out in your schoolyard and have kids in the, that's an allowable expense. You can talk about your willingness to use some of the funding to be able to open your enrollment to more students, particularly those who are not in full-time schooling. Or talk about the impact of COVID on being able to provide distance learning opportunities for students who lack resources to be able to access that, but that had you X more dollars allotted for technology you could do. So, I mean, these are things you need to be creative about. How can you show COVID has impacted your school and therefore you need these dollars to be able to provide a more robust education? Again, I use the term dollars, but we know it's not dollars that we're talking about. We get the goods and services paid for by the department. Jennifer mentioned early obligation of funds. So the timely in a timely manner is what's important, but within 6 months, they, meaning the SEA, has to tell you what it is they're going to approve, what they're approving for you to be able to spend the funding on. So the obligation comes once they make the commitment. You have a consultation, you submit your application, and they say, yes, X, Y, and Z, and you want so much for cleaning supplies this year and next year, et cetera. So the obligation comes when they sign the agreement. And then if they are renting property for you, like I mentioned, then the obligation takes place when the property is used. So they may be renting trailers for you for the summer for additional summer school projects or work. Then the obligation is clock ticking on the obligation is when you're actually in the facility. The other piece that's really important is the unobligated funds, because the unobligated funds have to go back to the governor. Now, when they are dividing the funding, when they're giving the allocation, just to back up to, I guess I'm not going back, okay. How they make the allocation depends on a number of factors that they have to work with. And so we're, suggesting to people who are working with the state education departments, when you are looking at allocations, you need to know first who's applying. Not every school will be applying. Some will be getting PPP loans. Some in the private school community don't deal with public monies at all. So whether they are counting, as I was talking earlier, but they're $250 million among 10,000 kids. That's the number of kids. But if really only 7,200 kids are in the schools that are applying, your allocation is a lot bigger. So what hopefully would be the way in which they divide this money is that they ask quickly who's in, how many kids are in that, and then you do the PPA. But if they do all 10,000 kids are counted and you get a PPA based on that, but only 7,200 apply, then the obligated funds have to go, unobligated funds have to go back to the governor. And unfortunately, it says for any authorized uses in GEERS 2, which is not just private schools. In GEERS 2, the governor has discretion to use it for a number of things, for higher ed, for early childhood, for state support, for a number of things. So it's important, even though it says it could be used for private schools, it doesn't have to be. So we recommend pushing for a second go round of the unobligated money for private school students. In order to apply, you have to be a nonprofit that was operating in accordance with state law before March 13th, 2020, which is the day, the national emergency. You have to sign something that says you did not apply for a new PPP loan. But if you did have one prior to this, so you first go round, you got a PPP, that doesn't count. You do have to declare it on the application, but it doesn't count. So in this go round, it's an either or. So the application process.
Okay, over to me. Okay, so now to get a little bit more specific into the application process itself. First of all, I want to say that I hope you guys are having these conversations right now with your SEA and with state leaders in your state, because once the funding arrives, that clock starts ticking. And so the more kind of administrative conversations and consultation, for lack of a better word, that we can do now will help the process begin for those non-public schools faster. So the deadline that we briefly talked about, they have 30 days to get the application out to you, but let's hope they don't use all of those 30 days so that 6-month clock, is to our favor. Then they have 30 days to apply, approve or disapprove. And again, just to reiterate, consultation is not required by law, but I would encourage you to work with your Catholic conference and your other non-public leaders in your state to insert yourself in this conversation, proactively go to them to have these conversations, and also in a manner of mutually beneficial ideas. Here's ideas for the application. We'd like to give you our thoughts. We'd like to proactively share this with you to make your lives easier so that this process is easy for everyone. Now, the required things that are in the application, this is all in the law. This is not a USDE thing, or this is not the SEA coming to you asking for data that you don't want to give and you don't feel like you have to. This is in the law. And some of it's kind of annoying. So first of all is the low income children. And let me back up one thing and say, at the end of this, we have all the links to the Department of Education. They have put out a sample application for the states to use for you. So the states don't even have to start from scratch. They can use this USDE sample application. I've been getting a lot of questions. Do I like this application? And generally my answer is yes, because it's just what's in the law. They're not asking for anything extra, no discussion of outside of information about your school. It's just what's in the law. So that's why we do generally feel like this is good. So low income families, how you calculate this, what we need to advocate for as we're having these conversations is the most wide range ability to determine this number. So please do not use the word Title I. We don't even talk about Title I. This is not a Title I program. We don't want any connection to Title I. It does require low income count, but it's not Title I, and those are not synonymous phrases. So just don't even mention Title I. But there's lots of, so we want to have an array of federal programs that do calculate this. So we've got E-rate, you've got the school lunch program. Yes, Title I, we'll mention it. And all of these other options, and these are listed on the sample application. The USDE has already told the SCAs, here's an array of places that you can get this information. They also say you can use census data. And then they say, if none of this is available, if the private school can't provide it, then you can come up with some proportionate share of poverty in your neighborhood. So they kind of give them all the ability to do as many options as possible. And so I will hope that we ensure that all of those options are on the table for the application, and don't let the SEA narrow this down. Excuse me, I'm on a walk. Don't let the SEA narrow this down to you to be limited to any one category, particularly Title I. Then, sorry, can you go back, sister? There was one other thing I wanted to say. The application also requires you to talk about your needs that sister mentioned, all of these arrays. And again, let's not let them box us into one thing like tuition revenue loss. No, that's not the only thing. We want to have, an open-ended place to describe all of the ways that COVID has impacted our institution so that we can ensure that all of those manners of impact are there to be counted for the targeting that they're supposed to do, target the schools that have the lower. And then the last thing I just want to say on the application, this is really important at the school level, like whoever is literally filling out the application, is that you may or may not know what your allocation is going to be when you fill out this application. As Sister mentioned, they're going to have to wait and see all the schools that apply, how many children come in, how many children they're dividing this pot by, and you may not know when you do this application. So how much money do you ask for? Well, I would ask for at least twice as much as you think you're going to get, because if depending on your state, if a number of non-public schools don't participate, then that pot is going to grow and grow and grow. We are hearing approximately $500 per child is kind of a good ballpark that you could estimate that without any of the weighting, without counting low-income kids, without counting, targeting anything, that's kind of a ballpark. Now that said, if you've got a lot of low-income kids, your per pupil will probably be higher than that. So that's at least a guidepost. Don't hold me to that. It's just a guidepost that you could create an application and create your list of requests, your list of services that you're asking for. But I would literally double that. Whatever you think it might be, just double it. And then if that pot of money grows and grows and grows because other schools aren't using it, they don't have to come back to you to ask you to fill out the paperwork again. And reiterating, this application, it takes you through 2023. So if you say, oh, my request number 1 is a summer school program to catch up. Okay, then multiply that times 3, because you could do that in 2021, 2022, and 2023. So let's front end our application with all of this now, over asking, overestimating, and then they can always come back and say you don't have enough money, but let's over ask. And that also speaks to your need. If you have all of these requests in a super long list, then you're demonstrating your need in and of itself right there. All right, there we go. Thank you, sister. Okay, so the next 2 slides are all of the eligible things that you may ask for, the services and assistance that you may ask for. Just like Equitable Services, you ask, they buy it, they send it to you. You don't get to purchase it yourself. And I won't read through all of this. I think most of y'all have probably seen all this, but generally speaking, it speaks to your building, your health and safety of the children, and academic response to needs that are related to COVID. Couple, specific things we haven't seen before: reasonable transportation costs, leasing sites if you had to grow your physical space, and then the reimbursement part itself. So, sister, if you want to go to the reimbursement page, you may be reimbursed for expenditures that you have incurred all the way back to March 13th. However, there are a few exceptions, and they are listed here on this slide. Generally speaking, because of the control of funds language, which Sister is going to talk about, these are things that you that are consumable that you would not be able to physically return once the emergency is over. So you'll see a differentiation between an improvement of an entire building ventilation system. You can't get reimbursed for that, but you can get reimbursed for a portable air purification system, because that is a tangible thing that you could potentially have to return at the end of this emergency. So these are the things that you cannot get reimbursed for, but these are all things you can ask them to cover right now going forward. And so all of these things are things you have until 2023 to ask for, but if you've already spent the money on these things, you may not get reimbursed for these. And with that, sister, I'm going to have to log off to my call, and my email will be at the end of this. Feel free to contact me anytime, and please make sure you're working with your state Catholic conferences in your state. Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, the question occurs every time we have a financial benefit for private schools, as is accepting goods and services making the school a recipient of federal financial assistance? And the answer is no. For most of this program, the goods and services are delivered to the school in the same manner as any of the title programs. You request the SEA in this case, or whoever the SEA has administered that part of the program, spends the money. They are the fiscal agent. The SEA is the fiscal agent. And even in this case, where they're going to reimburse the school for participation in the program and asking for payback for what we spent prior to this part of the program, you're basically selling what you bought to the SEA, and they are just paying you for that. So in the law, it says that it's not a recipient of fund. It does not make you a recipient of federal assistance, federal funding assistance, if you are reimbursed. Because the services, as we say, go through the public agency, whether that's the SEA or a third-party provider. And the control of the funds remains with the SEA. That's the important piece. The SEA is the fiscal agent. And so they own the property that is provided for your use. Now that, the consumable goods, no. I mean, that's, like when you get workbooks under Title I and things of that sort, you don't have to give them back. But pretty much computers that you might get, or the portable air filtering machines and so on, technically they belong to the SEA and are loans to you. So the one thing that we're not sure of how far down this third-party provider will go, because it could be a public agency, including the LEA. They could be the ones who would control the distribution, but they do not own the goods. That is still owned by the SEA. So hopefully, for the most part, you'll be dealing with the SEA or a third-party contractor, and not necessarily the LEA that you're working with for your other CARES funds or for your regular Title I funds, 2, 3, and 4. Length of assistance. The law is clear that the supplies and things that are purchased with this EANS money that can through 2023, when they're no longer needed for the purposes of EANS, and that's what's important. This is to overcome the COVID impacts on your schools and students and teachers. When that need is no longer there, then the property goes back to the SEA. They remove them from the private school. They don't, in some cases, I've heard of LEAs that want to take back, the computers that people have gotten under CARES 1 for student use and take them back for the summer and then give it. This does not apply here. You can hold on to the EANS as long as the program is still in effect. And then once they are removed and they go back to the state, the SEA can still continue to allow non-public schools to use those under some other federal education program. So for instance, the portable air filters that you may have had in your request. After the COVID relief is off, you could ask for them to be distributed back to your school, say using the Title IV program for safe and healthy schools to continue to provide better quality air for your students. So there are ways between the various ESSA or the IDEA programs that you might still continue to be able to use that program with the state. And so while the state has to maintain control, they might then deliver it off to the LEA to help you use it for those other title programs. So you may have long-term use beyond 2023 of whatever it is that you are requesting from the program. And so this is the additional resources page where we have the EANS website that the Department of Ed has put up, and the FAQs. Hopefully you will have those and downloaded them. And then the allocation table that I was discussing earlier, that you get some ballpark of what it is that your state is getting, and then try to estimate what is the private school community numbers, and then you have some ballpark. Okay, looking at the questions, is there a list of states that have already applied? Not at this time, and I don't know when they will put out and if they will release what states. They probably will down the road, but not now. Each state will be able to determine the formula they use based on student population. Are there some basic formulas or rubrics that have to be followed? Basically, no. The state has complete discretion as to how to serve low income and schools that are impacted by COVID. So with the combination there, the thing that's really clear from the department Q&As is that every school is to participate. Every school has been impacted. The priority is given to the higher percentage of poverty, but it's a priority. It's not an exclusion. Looking for creative uses of funds, it's going to be a lot of money for schools and want to make sure it's all usable. Right, so Paul has this in 2 places. That's going to be possibly a problem going forward. We are hearing from a number of schools that their pastor or their bishop says everyone's got to take the PPP loans, that they want to make sure the salaries will be paid and the schools will be open. So for all of those schools that take the PPP, the money they might have gotten under the EANS is back in the general pot. And that's why it's important to try to work with your state to find out ahead of time what is the actual number that we're going to be using to divide the money among, so that we don't have 3/4 of it going back into the Gears 2 fund that anybody can use when it really is earmarked for private schools. And we certainly don't want having so much money left over that the next time we need something, it's harder to get it because they'll say, well, they never used it to begin with. So this is something that we really need to pay attention to. You know, how can we make the best use of what's available? So I think I have, let's see, down here. May you still apply if your number of low-income students is very low? Yes, because you also have, besides low income, you have impacted things that you can point to that your school has had to go through to try to provide learning, and you dream big, as Jennifer was saying, about what else you could do if you had more funding. Are we able to use tuition assistance? Yes. So that tuition assistance is something from family income. Yes. No, tuition aid be given to families, but could tuition financial aid given to families, but used as a markup for low? Yes, that's both the same thing. You can use that, but you can't use any of this funding for tuition assistance. So the payment for reimbursement can be paid directly to the school. Yes, it is a allowable in the law, and it does not count as a recipient of federal financial assistance. The important thing with the receiving federal funds is that then you become subject to all of the things that the public schools are in terms of the FERPA, in terms of Title VII, in terms of Title IX, and the other various issues dealing with sexuality and gender and so on. So that's why we have exceptions to all of that, because we are not recipients of federal financial assistance. Let me see. Yes, Mark noted that Jennifer is keeping a list. Yes, but that is not public at this time. No, the governor is not. There's a question there that, you know, if you're taking PPP and there's still money left over, can the governor let you go back in? No, it's once you take PPP money, after, in this second go round, you're out of EANS. Has anyone developed a list of creatable, acceptable uses? No. And what I would encourage you to do is to think of all of the ways in which you could improve the instructional opportunities for the kids in your school, for the kids who want to come to your school, but you can't accept them because of the social distancing requirements. And for schools that have to go on, some of the kids come 2 days, the others come the other 2 days, and because you don't have the space to put them all in. So leasing other space, being able to have additional resources that could help you provide full-time formal instruction for all kids would be one of the creative uses of those funds. So you need to think big, think out of the box, and look back to what would you want for your school. And then you address it in terms of what has COVAC done that I can't do A, B, and C, and then how would this funding help us to do that? So I don't see any other questions on here. So if anyone wants to type in a last minute, can you use EANS to give families tuition assistance? Absolutely not, unfortunately. That was a very specific piece. The governor can't find a way around. In the original CARES bill, the first one, in the GEAR fund, then the governor could, and several governors have given state scholarship organizations money out of that GEAR 1 fund. That's specifically prohibited in GEAR 2. So there's no way you can, use that money to do that. Okay. Can funds be used for summer programs for salaries? Probably not the salaries, but yes, for funding some of the supplies and materials for the summer programs. We're looking at whether or not that salary piece could be, but we're not likely that's going to happen. That's more of a direct aid. That salaries have always been prohibited. We can anticipate, right, the closing year to expend this money. They have to obligate it, say you can have it within 6 months, but you can spend it up until September 30th, 2023. Is the EANS for past expenses or only for projected? EANS is for both. EANS is you can get reimbursed if you have appropriate receipts that you purchased the stuff that it was actually used, you can submit that. And then the rest of EANS is all for what's projected. That's the biggest part of EANS. What are we looking to do with this money? Yeah, if the third party if the third party is a contractor for some of the programs, the third party contractor deals with the SEA or whoever is administering the program about, how the summer programs would go. If you're doing a summer program yourself, that's a problem. But if you are working it through a third-party provider, that's not a problem. The one problem with the third-party providers is they usually are not able to get funding for the principal. They get funding for the people who are actually instructing. So keeping the school open and paying someone to be the supervisor is not usually covered. And that's why a number of schools don't want to participate. Is there any general preference between PPP or EANS? No. Right now, for many people, they know what they would be asking for in the PPP. They want, $820,000 because that will cover the salaries and the various things you're able to get. We don't know yet what you're going to get under EANS. And they're two different buckets of money for two different purposes. And I know what we're hearing, many of the bishops are saying, and the pastors are saying, take the PPP money, we need to pay the salaries. We're not collecting as much tuition, we need to pay the salaries. Others are saying, I could get triple that amount on the EANS money, but I can't use it to pay salaries. So it really is situational. What is the most immediate pressing need? if paying salaries is not the most immediate pressing needs, you may want to, and probably might do better with the Eames, but unfortunately, for many schools, that's not their choice, that the pastor for an elementary school, or even the bishop says to all pastors, take PPP. That's where you have to go. What kind of proof? Yes, someone's asking here about the, what kind of proof will PPP require? It's comparing one quarter to another of last year to the year before, and being able to justify, again, this kind of a question here is really where you need your finance people to talk to your lawyers and to figure out how they can meet the requirements of the law. So I don't see any additional questions. Anyone else have a question they want to type in? So we are really at an important place right now. Hopefully every governor will apply, even for the perverse notion that they can get whatever the private schools don't spend, which may encourage them to apply. Hopefully we don't leave anything on the table that they can use, but the governor has to make that decision, by February 8th. And then we've got to make sure that all our schools understand what is available and where to go with that. So any additional questions? No, so I think that's it. You have my email at the end, and Jennifer's, if you want to contact us for additional information, we're happy to help. So Jonathan, do you want to wrap it up then? So thank you all. We appreciate taking the time. This can be a real game changer for a lot of our schools. So hopefully we're able to make it work for most of our schools.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for being with us, and a big thank you to Sister Dale and Jennifer, but she had to jump off. Really appreciate your time today. Just a reminder, so you'll get access to the slides as well as the recording in a follow-up email. So please look for that, and we hope that you join us next time. So thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks, Sister.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan.